Next up, guys, Rotary Polishers. Jesus, I'm looking at myself in the viewfinder and my eyes look knackered and my hair's, well, lack of it, what's left is sticking up in all sorts of directions. Never mind, you're tuning in for the quality of the information, not the quality of my appearance. Right, let's keep going, John. I'm going a bit mad here. Rotary polishers. So I like to use rotary polishers. They are cool machines, but we're not talking about the machines so much in this video. So I'll typically pair up a mini rotary polisher with a full-size rotary polisher, and I'll use a range of plate options down to the 1-inch spot pads, the 75mm pads, a bit like the little mini dual action ones, and then 125mm plate on the full-size rotary typically. And I've got the larger plates and some larger pads. I don't typically like to use those. Find them a little bit more of a handful, and they're just a bit large when you're dealing with curves and stuff like that. But it all depends on how you're polishing, because there's all sorts of different techniques with the rotaries. And you know, a lot of people not even using foam pads will be doing their cutting with kind of wool and maybe finishing off with dual actions and all this variation or whatever. Some guys even not using the rotaries flat on the panel, using them with kind of pressure and fast moving curves and all that sort of stuff. So it can get complicated, but for how I use the rotary, I want to be using with these two machines and this combination of plate sizes. So the first set of pads we're going to be looking at in the rotary world are the Koch Chemie ones. Now I mentioned these in the Koch Chemie review video, and they just had this one kind of large size pad. I think it's a 160mm pad, yeah, for the 150mm plate. And the price on them was phenomenal. The cutting pads were $4.95, which was like, holy crap, that's cheap. But the foam finishing ones I think were $9.95, so there was a big jump up between these and these, and it was a bit of an unusual thing. But anyway, there seems to that one option seems to have gone now, and it's been replaced by the same range of foam, which is yellow for their most coarse cutting, orange for their polishing, or medium cutting, lighter, you know what I mean, mid-range, white for all out polishing, and black, as they say, no cut finishing, mega soft or whatever. We'll talk about some little things here we do with pads and how they describe cut, because it is typically abrasives doing the cutting, not the pads, but the pads do play a role in it. So nowadays with this Koch line, you have an 80mm pad that you could use on the little mini polisher, or use the mini plate on a bigger polisher. You might want to whiz it up a bit faster because you get less movement of the abrasives with smaller pads on rotaries. Then your 130 backed pads for the 125mm plates, 160 and even a 210 size pad, which is enormous. Prices for those are $6.75 for your 80mm, $7.45 for your 130, $8.56 for your 160, and $11.26 for your 210. So really good prices on your standard 125mm back size of $7.45. That's a really good price whenever you get below sort of £8, something like that. These are open cell pads, primarily for use on the rotary with the straight wall and a little bit of a curve in there, although you can use them on dual action pads if you'd like to. They'll work okay. On the long throws though, where they're getting worked hard, they're probably not as suitable as the cone pads in my opinion. So overall comments on these, very good price. Good range on the pads, although you can't get spot pads on the rotary, which is something that I'm looking for. The very tiny spot pads for the little kind of 1-inch things for very tight areas on extension bars. Their most coarsest option, the yellow, is not that aggressive. It's a very dense open cell pad. You can still work heavy abrasives with it, but it's relatively soft and it's relatively fine for a heavy pad. In fact, perhaps the most least aggressive of all of the heavy cutting pads out of all of them that I've seen. On the rotary, you can kind of compensate for that a little bit. You certainly wouldn't want to be using those very coarse blue pads on a rotary at high speeds. So they probably know what they're doing, but it's worth mentioning that's not a very aggressive pad. That's pretty much all to say about these ones. Very viable, very good price, quite safe when you're starting out. The reason perhaps this pad doesn't go up so high is that Koch are kind of more closer to the professional scene almost, and the detailing scene is quite different. And when you go above this, you typically are using wool pads, so you'll be kind of cutting with wool, taking out sanding marks and stuff like that. And then below that, you could be polishing more or refining more. So I think this kind of fits that ilk a little bit more, in my opinion. But very viable because of the price and the quality of the foam. The pad quality on these is nice. Next up, Lake Country Hydro Tec pads, so slightly thinner than the Kochi pads. Again, primarily designed for rotary use. They're like little cookies, aren't they? They've got a slight kind of taper on there, which gives you a little bit of protection, a straight wall, and then a kind of curved in, and then a completely flat surface. They're advertised as being kind of developed, I believe, for kind of water-based abrasives, but I can't see the relevance of that when I've kind of played around with them. They seem to work fine on oily abrasives as well. USA manufactured, again with the imported European foam, I believe. Size options, you can get them in the 4-inch 80mm pads for this machine, which is important, and then they come in the 5.5-inch as well for the full-size kind of rotary. So you've got a bit of range on size, but I cannot see a spot pad available for these. Again, there's a lot of pads, and so if I'm wrong on that, say in the comments, but I don't think you can get little smaller spot pads, not snot pads, in the Hydro Tec range. Price $5.95 for the 4-inch pads and $8.95 for the 5.5-inch pads, which is not a bad price actually. And that's what you can pick them up in the UK. Normally the American stuff, you know, the price to get it over here is a little bit more. So it's not a bad price on these pads. They're quite simple. In terms of the range of coarseness you've got there, blue, they're kind of highest cut on the foam, orange, they're polishing, and red finishing. So it's very simple. Lake Country don't sort of go in for this giving you millions of different options. It tends to just be a few. And again, a bit like the Kochi, even their most aggressive kind of blue and their orange polishing, it's quite hard to tell just from feel the difference between these. They're not very aggressive pads, which again on a rotary is probably a good thing. They are closed cell pads as well, I believe. So yeah, decent pads these. A lot of people recommend these for use on rotary, and I can see why. Very standard, nothing fancy about them, but they just work really, really well. So that is the Lake Country Hydro Tec. Next up, guys, we have the Flex range of polishing sponges, as they're called on the packet. Polishing Flex, Das Original Polish Form polishing sponge. So let's get our head around what we've got here. These are European manufactured pads with European foam. The size ranges that you've got on this Flex pad range, you have the 40mm spot pads that work with the Flex 35mm backing plate. You have the 80mm small pads which work on the 75mm Flex backing plate. You have the 140mm pads which are designed to interface with the 125mm plate, and then the large 160mm pads to go with their kind of 150mm Flex backing plates. And all these backing plates are flexible backing plates, so they have a foam core in there. So if they're not foam backed, they're a little bit stiff or a little bit kind of brutal. You want a little bit of foam in your backing plates. Some of them have got massive great chunks of foam in them, some of them haven't. I need to talk a little bit about backing plates later on, but the Flex ones, you know, the threads on them, they fit perfectly into the Flex machines, obviously, so that's the reason that I'm kind of using those. And obviously they've been designed to use with the Flex range, a bit like Rupes have kind of thought all this out. Flex have now very recently brought these pads out and these range of plates to provide you with kind of all these solutions. Right, what do you have in terms of coarseness? Very simple. You have their green heavy cutting pad, which is a very coarse pad with chopped fins all the way through it to help with the cooling. So like a pattern of cuts, if you like. Although when you just look at the pad, it looks completely flat until you kind of open it up a little bit and you can see all those little channels. You then have their purple kind of medium cut pad. You have their orange polishing pads and their red dual foam, very soft, all out and out finishing pads, if you like. So it's quite simple, 4 options in there, and there's a big difference between each of these, but it's covering the spectrum. Very aggressive, not always suitable to use these green pads if you're just sort of taking out swirls on a car. Purple medium, which will give you a fair amount of cut, but there's a big step down that you can almost use these with one stages on kind of heavy paints. You can almost use them for heavy correction on softer paints. Most times actually the purple is probably going to be more suitable, but let's not ramble on, let's get through it. Nice soft polishing orange pads and then very fine finishing pads. They are open cell pads, I believe. In terms of what you can use them on, now I think Flex say you can use these on all of their kind of polishing machines, and they've now very recently brought out the long throw kind of ranges. They've had the force rotation 3401 for ages, and obviously they've had their rotaries kicking around. What do I feel about them? I feel that they are more suitable for rotary use with a kind of straighter wall, although there's a little bit of tapering going in there. So it's kind of a halfway house between a complete straight wall pad and the cones, but flat faces that really sit down on the panels nice. You can use them on the dual action polishers, but with this very small kind of 80mm pads and the spot pads, which you're always going to get, you can see that kind of corkscrewing of the pad as it's kind of moved in all these different directions. So perhaps the cone pads will hold their shape better, but they still work. They're kind of less prone to stalling, I'll also find, with these. So yeah, they're an option as well for the dual action polishers, but I'm interested in them primarily for the rotary polisher. Let's talk about prices, guys. So these little spot pads, which there's very few of them of, they come in packs of 2 and you pay, I think, about 8 quid for these. So they're about 4 quid a pad, which isn't cheap, is it? But Flex had these spot pads out before they relaunched and redid all their pad range, and they were about 9 quid each, and people were still buying them, but they were a little bit out of price for me at that sort of price range, because there's so few quality spot pads on the market. There's just so few options. Yeah, you're kind of really forced. But now at 4 quid a pad, I'm a lot more comfortable with that. It's kind of cheaper than all the other ones that do spot pads that I've mentioned. So I like the price on these. You'll pay about 8 quid, 8 or 9 quid for this twin pack of the 80mm pads. So they're about 4 to 4.50 each, which is cheaper than the Chemical Guys Hexlogic ones, which are 6.95 each. So it's a decent price there. These, I think you'll pay about 11 or 12 quid for the 125mm pads. I'd have loved it to have been under a tenner, because then it would have just been, the price would have been really solid. That £10 is like the benchmark. When it goes beyond that, I start twitching, but it's not massively beyond that, and these smaller ones are quite good value, so it offsets it a little bit. And then the real stonking size 160mm ones, big old thick pads, I think you're going to pay about kind of 16, 17 quid for those, maybe a bit less. You know, prices do vary on all of these, which is expensive, but I don't really need these. I've just got a few, but that's an expensive price at that big size. But like I say, really those and those are all I kind of need, and overall the price isn't too bad. Open cell, primarily developed for the rotary. They're all compatible with every range of polisher. They're sort of a halfway house between a straight wall pad and a full-on cone, where there's a bit of tapering coming out of the bottom of the pad, so it can handle that kind of force rotation a little bit more. Not force rotation, the dual action, sorry. The dual action wobble a little bit more. But when you start using the smaller pads, especially those spot pads, although all of them are going to distort on a dual action, those little pads, because there's no strength, there's not enough foam there to provide you this kind of structure. But you do notice when you use the soft pads on a dual action that as they sort of warm up, they can distort a little bit, less than the cone. So, you know, it's a hard job trying to create the ideal pad for every sort of machine. Like I say, you can use them on all, but I'm looking primarily to use them on kind of rotary, or I might give them a whirl on the forced rotation as well at some point, because we'll talk about those later on. But my favourite pads are no longer available, which, you know, I've bought tons of them, so it's kind of protected me. But anyway, let's crack on with this. So the cool thing about the Flex pad, like the Rupes thing, is that they thought about giving you a system where you don't have to worry about plate sizes and compatibility and pad sizes. You've just got the whole range of capability that you need. The coarseness options in the pad are really, really cool. You've got everything you need without having to get like 7 different types of foam pads, which is quite cool. You may argue you don't need the reds, but I think the reds are quite nice finishing pads actually, so I got a few of those. So you could really operate off purples and and purples and orange most of the time. But there's a case that sometimes you might want those very heavy cutting pads as well. So very cool option there. That is the Flex polishing pad range that is pretty new to market and has just been released. Next up, guys, we have the Scholl Concepts range of pads, the Spider range of pads that come in the really nicely packaged with this little kind of chart which shows you how to use the Scholl Concepts Spider pads with the particular Scholl Concepts abrasives. I put this on Instagram. Some guys were saying it looks a bit complicated, and I was like, no, it doesn't. Actually, yeah, it does, but it's not actually that complicated once you stare at it for 4 hours, and once you stare at it for 5 minutes, it kind of makes sense, and it just gives you a guideline of what abrasives you could use under what circumstances. Let's go through these Scholl Concept pads. So they are European-made pads. And I'm looking at the Spider range in particular that have this kind of hallmark slicing grid thing through them, except for this very soft pad that's in the range as well. It doesn't have that, but the rest of them are all sliced. They come in 90mm for the kind of smaller 75, 80mm plate sizes, 145mm for the that you would use with the 125mm plates. I wonder if Scholl have actually sized them up for their own backing plate systems, although they are compatible with the standard. I wish there was an industry standard on all these plate sizes rather than guys doing it their own way, so everything sort of fit a pattern, but maybe they feel that their size is better or whatever. And they also come in 160mm, so quite simply you've got this size, kind of this size, and then a slightly bigger size after that. The price, the smaller ones are around about $4.95. The medium size, kind of standard size, are $12.95, which is not cheap. And the larger ones are $17.95, which is not cheap. Then we look at the range of kind of coarseness that you've got in the Scholl Concept range. You've got their white heavy cutting pad, very coarse. Then you have this very dense blue pad that is very dense and very fine though. It's an unusual one, this blue one. I was really interested in that. That's their next kind of medium to heavy pad. Then you have the purple one, which is their kind of mid-range cutting pad. And then you have their orange polishing, and then this very soft waffle finishing pad, which is, you can polish with according to their chart, but you can't use it with S40 because apparently it's too oily and it clogs up the surface, which happens a lot with certain abrasives and very fine pads with small pores, but you can use it with S20, so that is very strange. I don't think you even need that pad though, really. This one will kind of do. They are open cell pads that are primarily, I don't want to put words into the mouth of Scholl Concept, in my opinion, primarily for use on rotary polishers. They can be used on the dual action polishers and the long throw and the force rotations, but they're actually kind of inverse cones, if you like. So they're going the other way rather than that way. And when you've got kind of more movement kind of like this, you know, with the orbit, you're going to get kind of the opposite effect of why they've used cone pads to hold their shape. When the pads are large, you can get away with all of this, and you could use straight wall pads on these machines if you want to. But you could say that the design isn't perfect for the long throw machines, although in practice it does work okay. They also do have the cooling holes. You know, so Scholl Concepts will probably have their own opinion on why they've done it that way, which will be infinitely more informed than mine. But on the surface of it, I prefer these for use on rotary. Right, what are my overall comments on this particular Scholl Concepts pad range? I think it's pretty awesome, guys. People have told me about them before. I saw them up at the UK Detailing Open Day, and Ian's always said they were great pads, and I always sort of thought, yeah, but they're too expensive. They're over my budget, and so I kind of always ruled them out, but I thought I'd better get them into this review, and I think they're awesome, guys. I really do. They're a little bit different with the approach. The difference is the range of the cutting pads you've got. I've not seen a cutting pad like this blue one that is really unusual, the way it's so fine but kind of stiff and quite safe. And it's the white one you will only really need to do if you really, you know, you're looking for extreme cut and kind of a very coarse pad. But the blue one is suitable for a lot of other, you know, 98% of the other kind of cutting purposes that you need. And if you do find the blue too aggressive, you have another little step down to the purple, and the purple is a fantastic pad as well. The purple you could almost use, well, it'd be ideal for kind of one staging where you want a kind of stiffer pad. It's got a nice feel to it, this purple pad. And then your out and out kind of softer polishing pad, which is still quite dense and still sits down on the panel really nice. I think out of all of the pads in this particular test, I've heard, this is the thing, there's so many different opinions. When I talked about them, mentioned before, one guy I think said it's all bling, you know, it's all bling and it's not, you know, it's expensive and it's all bling and you don't need it. Well, it is definitely expensive, that you can't argue with, but I don't think it's all bling based on the fact that they're really, really good. And I've been thinking long and hard about these particular pads, whether they're good enough for me. What is the killer? What is the Achilles heel? Well, the one thing that's bloody missing, and pardon my French, is there is no spot pad size again. And that's really important for me. I want a spot pad that matches the range. And I don't have it. And I was so impressed by these that I almost thought about I could perhaps just use the flex pads options, because I've talked about the fact that the foam in some of these pad ranges across different brands and all that is the same. Well, the purple flex pad feels identical, the same foam as the purple Scholl Concepts pad, which is good. Then there isn't an equivalent in the flex range of this particular pad, so I lose that capability. But again, the green Scholl pad feels similar. It's not exactly the same pad because this is a dual foam one, but it feels similar coarse foam to this white spider one. So I've got the kind of same capability with the flex and the Scholl white and purple. And same with the polishing, that I don't know if they're exactly the same, but it's giving me more or less the same capability. But the choice was the flex ones were a little bit cheaper. They were compatible with the plate sizes I wanted to use. And I had the small spot pad option, which is really cool. But what I was taking away from this on a personal kind of perspective, I'm delving off into what my personal kind of view is here, is I was looking at these to get the blue cutting pads, and then I could just have them in this size and put them in my range here, and just I wouldn't have the spot pad, unfortunately, and it wouldn't be the end of the world. I would just use the purple. But I really, really like this blue one. So overall thoughts on the Scholl Concepts spider pads, really, really impressed. One of the most impressive pads, I think, in the test or the review, but unfortunately, they're just not cheap. $4.95 for this size, no problem with that. It's cheaper than the Chemical Guys Hex Logic. But it's just that $12.95 price tag for the 145mm pad that I just wish it was like, even if it was at 10 or 11 quid, I'd be a little bit more comfortable with it. When it's, like I say, I start getting twitchy when they get above £10. I know, you know, at the end of the day, they are only foam backed on Velcro, and the foam is going to come in massive rolls and you're going to cut them out and all that sort of stuff. But my feeling is that these pads should all be under £10 in an ideal world. That's just my opinion. And when they start getting above it, I start getting twitchy. But really, really love the Scholl Concepts spider pads, and I can highly recommend them if you're really looking for something a little bit different that has a really good range of options, especially with the cutting, and that just feel really nice on the panel to me. Next up, guys, we're talking about force rotation machines. So force rotation dual action polishers. So they're the sort of halfway house between a force rotation rotary and a free spinning dual action polisher. They got the same sorts of dynamics as a free spinning polisher, except that rotation isn't just a sort of spin that's generated. The plate runs around a track, so you get a constant rotational speed that's driven and cannot be slowed down. It also means you don't get any plate stall or anything like that. It means you can utilise pressure a little bit more, gives you a bit more consistency and a little bit more capability, which comes in very useful when you're cutting and working heavier abrasives. The downside is that these machines are a little bit more unstable, especially when you're when you're using larger pads on them and you are doing heavier cutting where the abrasives require a little bit more working and you're going into the panel a little bit harder, any then sort of non-level can sort of pull you around, or you can even get some bouncing on the machine and stuff like that, which is why some people don't like them. Now, the solution to that particular problem for me was when Flex bought the 3401 out, it's been out for decades, I think it came with 2 proprietary plate systems, and I think they've introduced a new 115mm proprietary Flex plate that just mounts straight into the machine. You know, take the bolt off, put it on. Lake Country, for whatever reasons, created, which is unusual for another company to create, you know, an accompanying thing, created an adapter system. So a little adapter plate which sits in here, which would allow you to then mount 2 Lake Country plates specifically made for the adapter, one being the 4-inch plate, another one being the 6-inch plate. And that solved the problem by allowing them to then make pads for a smaller size and a larger, more standard size, if you like. The downside is it creates all sorts of confusion and non-standard options around this tool and pads. So sometimes it can be a bit confusing trying to figure out what pads you should be using with this force rotation machine. And you know, Flex are in development of a replacement to this 3401, and almost certainly they will standardise the plates, I would imagine, because that would be quite important. So there's one downside to the 3401. Thought I'd delve into that because it's interesting. Well, it's not that interesting, but whatever. Anyway, with this 4-inch backed plate, it mates up perfectly to these 4-inch hybrid power pads that Lake Country designed for this machine and this adapter plate system. Because these pads are smaller, not particularly aggressive and coarse, you can work them without getting pulled around all the time. And also with large pads on a forced rotation machine, it's very hard work trying to use a large pad to polish like a nice curvy wing or something like that. So, you know, great demoing them on flat panels and stuff like that, but the reality is trying to polish a front bumper with it, virtually, not impossible, but you're only going to be hitting, it's not proper. You need the right size kind of pads, or it's just going through the motions almost. But I found with the 4-inch backed plates and the 5-inch pads, you could polish out wings with them, you know, the top lines of the doors, even the A-pillars, you could get them in there. And it wasn't that much of a loss compared to a 5.5-inch pad that you would use on a standard dual action where you could cover more ground because it's a bigger pad. You'd notice it, but not that much. So it was less of a problem for me, and I could just use these as a kind of one size that works well for me, and I could polish most parts of the front bumpers and stuff. Not ideal, obviously. But there's no little mini DA to accompany these, so you're kind of having to use a little mini rotary to complement this at the moment, which is another consideration. But anyway, these pads worked awesome for me. The bad news is, for whatever reason, Lake Country have discontinued their adapter plate system, so they've stopped making the adapter plate, and they've discontinued their hybrid power pads. And I managed, after they discontinued them, they were still available in America. Someone was still selling them in America. I think it was Blackfire. So I just went and ordered an absolute shed load of them from America, a couple of £100 worth. And the irony was, it actually worked out cheaper, even with the import tax, to buy them from America than it did from the UK, which is just wrong, isn't it? But I don't know, but that's just the nature of the beast. But yeah, so I went and bought a load from America. If you're just buying 1 or 2, it won't be cheaper because of all the import stuff. You have their orange heavy cutting, their blue light cutting, their white polishing and their black finishing. The black finishing you don't really need. There is a gold in there as well, I think, that sits between these. I might even have one kicking around somewhere. But generally you just need white, blue and orange. And if you really want to minimise it, you could just go orange and white. They are not massively aggressive pads, and there's not that much difference between the blue and the orange, or there's a little bit. But I love them because you get most of the capability out of the forced rotation, and you often hear people saying they need more cut. And, you know, they want more cut, they want to go to microfiber, they want to go to wool. And it's always the people that tend to be looking for this extra cut are using the free spinning dual action polishers. Well, the free spinning dual action polishers have got a hell of a lot less capability than rotary polishers. If you ever played around taking out sandy marks, you'll spot that straight away. But obviously they're safe. they create a limit of how quick you can do this. And now it seems like the detailing industry, it's got everyone using these free spinning machines, which is fair enough. But now there's all this stuff coming out that's promoting giving you more cut and more capability with these free spinning machines. But the whole purpose of them was to throttle you back to make it safe. So I don't know. I still feel you can use the forced rotations and the rotary polishers completely safely with some very simple rules on using them a bit slower. And then this is all less of a problem, getting more kind of cut and capability. Next up are the replacement Lake Country hybrid force pads with 5.5 plates, 5.5 inch plates with 140 backing on them, that I think you would use. The closest match at the moment with a 3401 would be a 115mm flex proprietary plate, or if you're using them with the Rupes machine, which would be a faux pas as far as Rupes are concerned, but you could use them with the 125mm Rupes backing plate on the Rupes Millet. You could probably also use them with the Makita force rotation, or I'm not sure. Check your plate sizes. So you've always got to check your plate sizes. Confusing. They are $9.95 each. They come in grey for heavy cut, orange medium cut, white polishing, and then black fine polishing, finishing, and red ultra fine finishing, or whatever all that sort of stuff is. White is probably as far as I'd need to go. You've got good range there. And I think if you want to get more cut than the foam one is, there's a wool option. Typically you won't see microfiber pads for force rotation machines, and we'll talk about why when we do the microfiber pad review. What do I think of these pads, guys? Well, I like the foam. I like the fact that it's not too aggressive and too coarse. Their grey pad, which is the equivalent of the previous orange, well, that feels a little bit stiffer. Very, very dense pad, really stiff pad. Unfortunately, I don't have the right backing plate for my force rotation. I'd need to buy the proprietary 115mm to test this out properly. Although I can get a sense of what it's giving you. You've got a slightly increased radius or diameter of the pads, which means that there is a little bit more push and pull than the smaller kind of 5-inch pads, although there's not too much in it. Very important on the force rotation to get these pads centered, or they're going to wobble all over the place, which is what I was getting, trying to center it on a tiny 4-inch plate, which wasn't ideal. With these, again, a bit like the Rupes ones that we'll talk about now, with their heavy cutting one, you do need to get a little bit more abrasives on there, so it's nice and slippery between the pad and the plate, to avoid that kind of vibration, to avoid that sticking, and to avoid that kind of getting pushed and pulled around. But I think Lake Country, it's not the most aggressive foam pad for the force rotation, but it's a really, really good cutting option, and I'm a fan of it. So, you know, they're almost the same sort of foam, just cut differently to a different size, if you like. So that's the hybrid force. Next up with the force rotation pads, we'll just quickly talk about this one. Rupes obviously brought out the Rupes Millet force rotation that comes with 125mm and 150mm proprietary Rupes plates. Come on, brain. Rupes offer you these very tiny flat plates. So what do they call them? Rupes flat forced rotation, European made pads, 5.5 inch for the 125mm, 6 inch for the 150mm, $8.95, which is not a bad price, although the amount of foam compared to what you get about half the foam with the other pads, so you'd almost want to be a bit cheaper, but I suppose it doesn't work like that. What range of aggressions have you got with this? Blue coarse, yellow polishing, white finishing. No green one, which is just really, you know, it's just, I don't understand why they don't have that. There's got to be a reason. I bet it's something to do with it sticking. I bet you they discovered something when they were doing that, because that can be a problem with these force rotations, like I say. But yeah, big difference, a big jump up, and this blue pad is just too aggressive for me. It's too coarse for how, you know, I typically want to cut, and you really need to lubricate this pad up and work it well. The yellow foam is amazing, you know, it's lovely, it's versatile. You can probably use it with 1 stages as long as you're not trying to ask it to do too much cutting. But it just feels good on the panel. It's a really nice pad, as I've talked about, same foam. Open cell pads. I've put here in my notes it needs an intermediate option between the blue and the yellow, and I've also put in my notes it's too thin. Goes into personal preference, this, guys, and I'm conscious that my personal preference doesn't always represent everything, and other guys I've spoken to favour these thin pads, but I don't. I just, even on a 125mm size, it's smallest, I can't get into the curves on the wings and stuff with them. I find them too flat. Like when I'm working over, I need the pad to be able to take that up on the force rotation because I don't have smaller options. So I like a thicker pad. Now I know repairs kind of say you get more kind of twisting of the foam and all that sort of stuff, but I don't care. I just struggle to get into the panels, into the curved panels with the thin pads, and I don't find I get more control back from having thin pads. I don't know why, but that's more to do with making sure the pads don't stick to me, but I've got much more control with these 5-inch hybrids on the 4-inch plate than I can get with those thin pads. But like I say, that's just my opinion. Those are the 3 options, guys, for force rotation. Lots of these other pads, like your Kochis and your Lake Countries and your Scholl Concepts and stuff like that, you could probably work on these force rotation machines, and you'd have to try it out. But I've already found a kind of combo that I've bought up in bulk that works for me. So those are the force rotation pad options that I've explored. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching. So an overall summary of the recommendations on the DAS6 Pro Type 8mm dual action polisher machines. I think the Chemical Guys Hex Logic range is a really good pad to start off with because of the quality of the pads. The price is okay, but it's that nice range of cutting pads you get with the yellow, orange and the green, and then your workhorse kind of white polishing pads. I think it's a really good starting point for anyone polishing, and the quality of the pads, they should hold up well as long as you don't abuse them. With your long throw machines that you might be pairing up with a mini, or you might not, if you've just got the long throw larger machine on its own, it's okay. The quantum pads are still a fantastic pad to start with, but you don't have that smaller option, so you'd have to pair them up, like I said, with these, which isn't ideal, but the range of cutting options you've got is just about right, I think. For me, if I had these tools, and I'm considering maybe getting a pair just because of the channel, I'm not sure how much I would use them, I think I would go with the either the Rupes or the Buff and Shine URO Tec, because of it gives me the capability I need, you know, with really going as coarse as I want with the green or the maroon, and then probably just having that polishing pad there would do me. Although you do have that softer option, I wouldn't need the blue pad really, it's too aggressive. I have a soft spot for the Lake Country pads. I just love the density of the foam. I love the feel of them. I love the quality of them. But it doesn't have the mini option at the moment. Maybe that will come in the future. Who knows? It's worth checking out all of these. That's why I've talked about them in this video, guys. You've got some of these Chinese ones giving you value. Even the Liquid Elements Centriforce ones are a good range. There's not much in it, and personal preference is going to come there. But I could see myself just using the Rupes yellow and green, and that would probably do me with a little combo on these long throw dual action polishers. But there you go. On the Rotary, I'm going to be using the new flex polishing pad systems, just because it gives me the capability. It gives me all the size capability throughout the range. And the spot pad thing is very important for me. There's very few options on there. Price point is good on the smaller pads, not great on the 125mm pads, but you know, it's costed me over 4 pads. It's costed me an extra sort of tenner or something when I buy a whole load of them. So I've already swallowed that up. So it's not that big a deal. But like I said, I really like the pads to be under £10 at that sort of size. Don't always get what you want. Very impressed with the Scholl Concepts range as well. Really impressed with the foam quality, the cutting options you get there. They're even more expensive, but I might get some of those blue pads because I think it provides a sort of midway point between the very extreme cut kind of green flex one I've got and that lovely purple, which is the same foam I believe in the Scholl Concepts and the flex range. So that's a cool little option. You know, consider all those other pads that I've talked about as well. And with the force rotations, as I've mentioned, I'm using the hybrid power, and I've stocked up with enough of those to last me for years. And hopefully when I run out of those, the new flex force rotation will come out and I'll revisit kind of pads for force rotation. But that works for me. Thank you very much for watching. Sorry it's a long video. I've tried, there's so much information I've thrown at you in this video. It's a completely non-friendly YouTube format to do videos this long. But there's just no way of getting this video down to a 5 or 10 minute kind of friendly format. So it is what it is. Okay guys, just before I wrap this video up as well, I went ahead and bought all of these particular pads from various distributors around the place, the chemical guys, the Quantums, you know, the things from Into Detailing, URO Tec, and all the ones that I've covered. And when I bought the HDO pads from Joe at Autoglands, he mentioned to me he's trialling a new pad, but it's not available right now. So I didn't want to feature it and tell you about it because he might trial it and then not sell it. But I'm going to mention it here because he sent me a box. You know, he said, have a look at them and tell me what you think. And he sent me a box of about 40 pads in it. It's just tons of pads, which was really generous. So I want to say thank you. It's this more pad range of European foam. And they come in two shapes, the cones and the rotary kind of standard, you know, tapered but straight wall pads. And they are available in every single size range, all the way down to spot pads, which is really important. But as well as that, they also do microfiber ones when you get above their kind of coarsest yellow foam option. So you've got a microfiber cutting pad, medium cutting pad, extra heavy microfiber cutting pad. And there's even a finishing microfiber pad as well, because a lot of people want that microfiber pad option. So Joe's looking at them now. I think he's happy with them, and I just need to speak to him. So I'm going to test those out and feed back to him. And if he decides to sell them, we'll do a separate video to say thank you for sending me so many pads. But I haven't cracked them out of the packet yet, so it's too early to say. But they do look on the surface of it good, and it will offer perhaps a lower price point, maybe even a sub £10 price point for the standard pads, which is competing for price with these other European foams, but it's a little bit cheaper than the American kind of foam. So it sounds like a winner to me. So I thought I'd mention that. That's the more pad range. So stay tuned to see if that does become available. Let me know what your pad recommendations are for what type of machines and what the prices are and what the variances and coarseness, and put where you get it from as well in the description. It will filter it out if it's a URL, so just put like JML Stores. Don't put www.jmlstores.com because YouTube will filter it. But that way the video will also build up a link of all of the things that other people are using. I cannot cover every single pad on the market because there are thousands. There are similarities between them like we have talked about, but we've covered about as many as I can bite off in this video. I've been talking for over an hour now with all the various attempts to get this right. I'm now going to have a fag and a coffee and think about editing this video at some point. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Stay tuned to the Forensics Detailing channel. We're on Instagram, as always mentioned. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. This is the best foam cutting video. We've got the shampoo and the snow foam ones, which I'm going to be gearing up to working on very, very soon. Take care, and that's it.
Holding on to what I knew, but the moment's gone. Where was I?